Okay, so you want to buy a cruise ship, dine a big boat, fill it with tourists, charge them for drinks, watch the money come in. Simple enough. People have been doing this for decades. The industry made $71 billion in revenue in 2024 alone. Surely there's room for one more player. There is. There's always room. The question is whether you can survive long enough to enjoy it. Let's start with the basics, because most people have no idea what they're looking at when they see one of these things. A modern cruise ship is not a boat, it is a city. A floating, moving, self-contained city that has to generate its own power, produce its own drinking water, treat its own sewage, feed thousands of people 3 meals a day, keep them entertained around the clock, and navigate across open ocean, all at the same time. Take the Icon of the Seas, which Royal Caribbean launched in January of 2024. It is 1,197 feet long, 20 decks tall, 18 of them for guests. It can carry up to 7,600 people. The crew alone is 2,350 people. That's more than most small towns. To put this into scale, the ship is only slightly shorter than the Empire State Building laid on its side. On board, you will find 40 different restaurants and bars, a Broadway-style theater, an ice skating rink, 6 water slides including the first suspended infinity pool ever built at sea, a full hospital, a shopping mall, a casino, internet access beamed down from satellites, and enough food to feed roughly 10,000 people 3 times a day. The total cost to build it, $2 billion. That is not a typo. $2 billion. For one ship? And here's the thing, that's just the entry price. That is simply what you pay to exist in this business at a competitive level. If you want something smaller, you can get a mid-sized ship for somewhere between $600 million and $900 million. A smaller luxury vessel designed for just a few hundred wealthy guests might still cost you $400 to $500 million. Because in this business, cheap is relative and small is still enormous. But the purchase price is almost beside the point, because buying the ship is not where most people go broke, before your ship carries a single passenger, before you sell a single drink, before anyone boards at any port anywhere in the world. You are already spending money. A lot of it. First, there's financing. Almost no cruise line pays cash for a new ship. They take out massive loans, often structured over 12 to 15 years, with interest payments that begin the moment the loan is signed. The Icon of the Seas, at $2 billion, would generate tens of millions of dollars in annual interest alone before anyone ever stepped on board. Then there's registration. Cruise lines do not register their ships in the United States, even though most of them are headquartered in American cities like Miami. They register them in places like the Bahamas, Panama, and Bermuda. Over 200 cruise ships currently fly the Bahamian flag. Royal Caribbean, Disney, Norwegian, they all do it. The reason is straightforward. Those countries charge far less in taxes and impose far fewer regulations. Registering under what the industry calls a flag of convenience saves cruise corporations millions of dollars annually, money that would otherwise go to the American government in the form of corporate taxes. The trade-off, as you'll discover later, is that when a crisis hits and you need government support, those governments are in no position to help you. There is also the matter of crew. A ship with 2,350 crew members has to pay all of them. The people who work in the engine room and the kitchens and the cabins, many of them come from the Philippines, Indonesia, and Eastern Europe. They work contracts of 8 to 10 months at a time, often with no days off, and they are paid wages that would be illegal in the United States, but are perfectly legal under the laws of whatever country the ship is registered in. Some entry-level crew members earn as little as $400 to $700 a month for 11-hour days, 7 days a week. This is not a secret. The Hustle, a financial publication, investigated this and published the numbers. The standard contract for a cleaner or dishwasher requires a mandatory 308 hours per month. That works out to roughly $1.62 to $2.27 per hour. This is how the economics work from the very beginning. The savings from registering in Nassau, Bahamas, instead of Miami, Florida, filter down through the entire cost structure. Less taxes paid, cheaper wages possible, lower regulatory burden overall. Now let's talk about the bill you receive every morning before breakfast. Royal Caribbean's own blog worked through the numbers in 2024. For a megaship like Icon of the Seas, at 250,000 gross tons, the estimated annual operating cost is roughly $355 million. Divide that by 365 days. You're looking at approximately $920,000 per day. Every day, whether the ship is full or empty, sailing or docked, $920,000 per day. Before you make a single dollar of revenue, here is where that money goes. Fuel is the biggest single expense outside of labor. A large cruise ship burns somewhere between 150 and 250 tons of fuel per day when underway. At current prices of roughly $500 to $600 per ton, that's between $75,000 and $150,000 per day, just to keep the engines running. This is why cruise ships travel at 18 to 20 knots instead of their maximum speed. Every extra knot costs significantly more fuel, and the relationship between speed and fuel consumption is not linear. Go faster, and the cost doesn't just increase. It multiplies, then there's food. Despite what you might imagine about the cost of feeding thousands of people 3 meals a day on a luxury ship, raw food costs actually come in at roughly 11% of operating expenses, around $13 to $14 per person per day. On a ship with 6,000 passengers and 2,000 crew, that's still about $112,000 a day just on ingredients. The reason it stays relatively low is bulk purchasing. Cruise lines buy enormous quantities of food directly from suppliers, cutting out every middleman in the chain. Then there are port fees. Every time your ship docks somewhere, Nassau, Cozumel, Barcelona, Santorini, you pay the port for the privilege. These fees add up quickly across a year of constant itineraries. Then there's maintenance. The Maritime Classification Societies, international bodies that certify ships as seaworthy, require that every passenger vessel enter dry dock twice every 5 years for full technical inspections and overhauls. Each dry dock event costs a minimum of $12 million and takes the ship out of service for weeks. When Royal Caribbean sent Allure of the Seas for a $100 million upgrade in April of 2025, the ship was out of circulation entirely. $100 million and zero revenue for the duration. Then there's insurance. A $2 billion asset sailing through waters that include hurricanes, rogue waves, and other ships requires comprehensive coverage, hull and machinery insurance, protection and indemnity coverage for passenger liabilities, environmental coverage in case of a fuel spill. The premiums are substantial, add it all up. A single large cruise ship, before it earns $1, costs somewhere between $800,000 and over $1 million per day just to keep existing. This is the fundamental pressure that every cruise ship operator lives under. Every single morning. Here's the thing most people get wrong about the cruise industry. They look at the cheap ticket prices. $400 for a week-long Caribbean cruise, sometimes less, and they think either the cruise line is losing money or the ticket price is a loss leader and they're making it up somehow. They're half right. The ticket is absolutely a loss leader. But most people don't fully understand what that means in practice. When you buy a ticket for $400 or $500, the cruise line is essentially paying you to come aboard. Not literally, but structurally. The ticket price, after commissions to travel agents, port fees that aren't really the cruise line's money, and basic operating cost allocation, leaves the company with very thin margins, sometimes negative margins. The ticket is the bait, you, the passenger, are the fish. The moment you step on board that ship, you enter one of the most carefully engineered commercial environments ever designed. Every element of the ship is calibrated to separate you from your money in a pleasant and entirely voluntary way. Think about it. You are on a ship in the middle of the ocean. You cannot go anywhere else. The nearest competitor is literally over the horizon. So when you're thirsty, you buy a drink from the ship. When you want internet access, you buy it from the ship. When you want a massage, you go to the ship's spa. When the ship stops at a port and you want a tour, you book it through the ship's excursion desk. When you sit down at a specialty restaurant instead of the regular dining room, you pay a cover charge to the ship. When you gamble in the casino, you gamble with the ship. This is what the industry calls onboard revenue. And it is where the real money is. Royal Caribbean's financial filings from 2024 tell the story clearly. The company carried 8.56 million passengers that year and generated $16.48 billion in total revenue. Of that, roughly 30%, or $4.3 billion, came not from ticket sales, but from things passengers bought once they were already on the ship. The margins on those purchases are extraordinary. An alcoholic drinks package like Carnival's all-inclusive Cheers program is priced at up to $90 per person per day. The actual cost to the cruise line of the alcohol in that package is a small fraction of that price, because they buy in bulk at wholesale rates. Gross margins on beverage sales exceed 80%. The casino operates in international waters, largely free from the gambling regulations that land-based casinos face. The spa sells treatments at prices that would be considered premium even in a 5-star resort. And because many of these purchases are made with a preloaded cruise card or a linked wristband, passengers often don't feel like they're spending money in real time. A design feature, not an accident. Royal Caribbean's own data shows that in 2025, Nearly 50% of their onboard revenue was actually secured before the ship even departed. Passengers pre-purchasing drinks packages, dinner reservations, and shore excursion through the company's app. Guests who pre-booked through the app spent 2.5 times more than those who just walked on board and decided later. This is the machine. The ticket gets you on the ship. The ship turns you into a customer. A passenger who buys a $500 ticket and then spends $800 more on drinks, excursions, specialty dining, Wi-Fi, and the casino is worth $1,300 to the cruise line. More than double what the headline price suggested. And they know this. They have the data from millions of voyages. They know exactly how much the average passenger spent at the spa versus the casino versus the gift shop versus the bar. They design the ships around that data. The fact that the duty-free shops are placed near the exit to the gangway, that the casino is positioned in a high-traffic corridor, that the specialty restaurants are clustered near the main atrium, none of this is accidental. Here is the counterintuitive piece of all this. You would think that a bigger ship means more costs, more complexity, more things that can go wrong. And you'd be right, a bigger ship does cost more. But the cost per passenger goes down, sometimes dramatically, as the ship gets bigger. This is called economies of scale, and it is the single most important economic concept in understanding why the cruise industry keeps building ships that are larger than anything that came before them. Think about what stays the same regardless of whether you have 2,000 passengers or 6,000 passengers on board. You still have one bridge, one set of senior officers, one engine room, or in the case of modern megaships, a set of massive propulsion systems that don't triple in size just because the ship triples in capacity. You still have one theater company putting on shows every night, one kitchen management structure, one hull to paint, one set of port contracts. When you spread those fixed costs across 6,000 passengers instead of 2,000, the math changes completely. The cost per passenger per day drops significantly. That means you can charge less per ticket, attract more customers, and still make more money in total than a smaller operator could. The numbers from industry analysis back this up. A typical cruise ship, not a megaship, just a regular modern vessel, generates between $200 and $300 million in revenue per year, with net profit falling somewhere between $20 and $40 million depending on occupancy and routes. Royal Caribbean, by building ships like the Icon of the Seas that can accommodate over 7,000 guests at a time, is essentially printing money at scale. Their 2025 adjusted earnings were expected to reach somewhere between $14 and $15 per share, a profit level that most industries would envy. But that scale comes with a cost. Not a financial cost, a structural vulnerability. On February 10, 2013, the Carnival Triumph set sail from Galveston, Texas, on a 4-day trip to Cozumel, Mexico. 4 days later, everything went wrong. A fire broke out in the ship's aft engine room, traced to a fuel leak from one of the diesel generators. The fire was automatically extinguished and there were no fatalities. But the damage to the ship's electrical cabling was catastrophic. Total loss of power. The HVAC system stopped. The refrigeration stopped. And most notoriously, the vacuum system that operated all of the ship's toilets stopped. Over 4,200 passengers and crew were left adrift in the Gulf of Mexico. The toilets overflowed. Sewage backed up into hallways. Passengers described raw waste in biohazard bags piling up outside cabin doors. People slept on deck to escape the heat and the smell. One passenger later told NBC News the conditions felt primitive. Others compared the smell to a zoo. 4 tugboats eventually towed the ship to Mobile, Alabama. It took 5 days. What came out in the subsequent investigations was perhaps more damaging than the incident itself. Carnival's own maintenance records showed that the diesel generator responsible for the fire had been overdue for maintenance for more than a year before the voyage. In the 2 years prior to the fire, there had been 9 separate incidents of fuel leaks from flexible fuel lines on the same ship. 2 weeks before the Triumph sailed on that final voyage, it had experienced propulsion issues that caused it to return to port 5 hours late. Carnival knew. The courts confirmed it. A federal judge ruled the cruise line liable and negligent. The financial consequences were enormous and layered. Carnival gave every passenger a full refund, $500 in cash, reimbursement of all travel expenses, and a voucher for a free future cruise. Then came the lawsuits, which were all eventually settled confidentially. Then Carnival committed over $500 million in fleet-wide fire prevention and engine room upgrades across all 24 of its ships. And then the ship itself, renamed Carnival Sunrise to distance it from the incident, was sent to Cadiz, Spain for a $200 million total rebuilding. New engines, redundant generators, redesigned sewage lines, better fire suppression, everything. $200 million. For one incident. On one ship. That started with deferred maintenance on one diesel generator. The difference between a ship running well and a ship in crisis is sometimes a fuel hose and a missed service date. That was bad, but nothing in cruise ship history compares to what happened starting in March of 2020. COVID-19 spread onto cruise ships faster and more visibly than almost anywhere else in the world. The Diamond Princess, a Carnival Corporation ship anchored off Japan in early February of 2020, became one of the most photographed symbols of the pandemic after 700 passengers tested positive and 9 died. The media labeled these ships floating petri dishes. The reputation damage was immediate and severe. By March of 2020, the United States Centers for Disease Control issued what became known as the No-Sail Order, a complete halt to cruise operations in American waters. Other countries followed. Within weeks, the entire global cruise fleet was idle, 100 ships, sitting in ports and anchorages around the world, going nowhere, carrying nobody, costing money every single day. This is the number that explains the structural danger of the cruise ship business model. Carnival Corporation, the world's largest cruise company, which had generated $20.8 billion in revenue in 2019, roughly $57 million per day, was now burning through $650 million per month with almost no revenue coming in. $650 million a month. With no passengers, because the costs don't stop when the ship stops. The ship still needs fuel to maintain basic systems. It needs a skeleton crew to keep the engines and sanitation systems from degrading. It needs insurance. It needs to make debt payments. And it has contractual obligations that don't simply pause because there's a pandemic. Carnival lost $10.24 billion in 2020, an average of $28 million per day in losses. To survive, the company raised $19 billion in new debt and equity between March and December of that year. Sold ships, scraped others, deferred deliveries of vessels that were already under construction. By 2023, Carnival's total debt had climbed to $32 billion, compared to around $12 billion before the pandemic. Even by 2025, with profitability recovered and the company posting record earnings, the debt load still stood at $26.8 billion. Interest expense alone consumed $1.35 billion in fiscal 2025, 6 times the $206 million they were paying in interest back in 2019. 6 times the interest. On profits that were admittedly also much larger, but the vulnerability is structural. A single bad year, another pandemic, another shock to consumer travel, and that debt becomes a death sentence. The cruise industry came back from COVID. Royal Caribbean posted $4.3 billion in profit in 2025. Norwegian, Carnival, all recovering, all posting record bookings. But the shadow of that debt and the memory of that near collapse sits underneath every earnings report. Now let's talk about the actual math, because that's the only thing that matters here. The good year, your ship carries 6,000 passengers at 108% of capacity, which sounds impossible but is how the industry works, because some cabins hold more than 2 people. Average ticket revenue of roughly $1,344 per passenger. That gets you to $8 million in ticket revenue per sailing. Add onboard revenue, drinks, casino, excursions, spa, Wi-Fi, at another $582 per passenger. That's another $3.5 million. Total revenue for a single 7-day sailing, roughly $11 to $12 million. Against that, operating costs of approximately $7 million for the week on a large vessel. Net profit per sailing, perhaps $4 to $5 million. Run 50 sailings a year, and you're looking at net income of $200 to $250 million per ship before interest payments and corporate overhead. A cruise ship typically generates $200 to $300 million in revenue per year, with profits falling somewhere between $20 million and $40 million annually, depending on size and itinerary. That $40 million in net profit on a $2 billion ship gives you a payback period of 50 years. At the upper end of the profit range, with a bigger and more efficient vessel, you get it down to perhaps 25 to 30 years, which is still a very long time for a depreciating asset. The bad year, occupancy drops from 108% to 70%. This happens during economic recessions, geopolitical conflicts, disease scares, bad weather seasons, all of which occur regularly in this industry. A fuel price spike adds 20% to your energy costs. A mechanical problem takes the ship out of service for 6 weeks. One of your primary itinerary markets, the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, experiences a hurricane season that forces route cancellations. Your revenue drops by 30 to 40%. Your costs stay almost exactly the same because they are fixed. Your annual profit of $40 million becomes an annual loss of $10 to $30 million. The difference between a good year and a bad year is $50 to $80 million. That is the gap. And it is the gap that determines whether this business works or doesn't work. Not the headline revenue numbers, not the record profit announcements, not the impressive new ships being launched with fanfare and fireworks in Finnish shipyards. Of the $1,926 in revenue generated from each Royal Caribbean passenger in 2024, 17.5%, or $336, ends up as profit. Sounds fine, until you understand how fast that margin evaporates the moment occupancy drops or costs rise. Here's the part nobody tells you in the vacation brochure. The companies that do well in this business are not the ones that simply built a nice ship and filled it with tourists. The ones that do well are the ones that have been doing this for decades, that have the scale to spread costs across dozens of ships and tens of millions of passengers, that have the negotiating power to buy fuel in bulk, food in bulk, and port access at rates no single ship operator could ever achieve. 3 companies, Carnival Corporation, Royal Caribbean Group, and Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings, control roughly 72% of the global cruise market. That is what an oligopoly looks like. 3 players with massive fleets, massive scale, massive negotiating power. Together, these 3 corporations held around 72.2% of the global cruise market. They also have something else: private islands. Royal Caribbean spent $250 to $450 million transforming a patch of Bahamian beach into Perfect Day at Coco Cay, a private destination that appears on itineraries as a port of call, but where every dollar spent by every passenger goes directly back to Royal Caribbean. No local restaurants, no independent tour operators, no competition. Their water park at Coco Cay charges between $74 and $189 per person per day for access. Cabana rentals go for over $1,000. The island is projected to generate over $600 million in direct revenue in 2026. Castaway Cay, Disney's private island, paid over $220 million in dividends to its parent company between 2014 and 2024, signaling high profitability from island revenue. This is vertical integration at its most elegant. The passenger pays to come on the ship. The ship goes to an island the company owns. The company captures 100% of every dollar the passenger spends on that island. No leakage, no competition, no sharing of revenue with anyone. That is the model that actually works in this industry. The cruise ship industry generated $71 billion globally in 2024. It will generate roughly $78 billion in 2026, according to projections. The ships keep getting bigger, the private islands keep getting more elaborate, the onboard upsell mechanisms keep getting more sophisticated, and every voyage is still a gamble. Film the cabins, sell the drinks, keep the engines running, avoid the storms, pray there's no pandemic, and you can make extraordinary amounts of money from one of the most expensive business models ever invented. Leave those cabins empty for long enough, and the ship doesn't just stop making money. It starts eating it. The next time you see one of these ships, a floating city, a billion-dollar moving hotel, sailing past the horizon, understand what you're actually looking at. You're looking at a machine designed to convert your vacation into revenue, your captivity into profit, and your relaxation into someone else's balance sheet. The house always wins. They just built the entire house, moved it out to sea, and made sure you couldn't leave.